Welcome, my fellow nocturnal historians. Tonight we're not walking into a temple or a war zone, but into a quiet hospital hallway where the lights hum louder than the truth. Imagine lying on a metal table, a warm hand on your wrist, and a voice saying, "This will help you sleep," while a needle glides in with something far stronger than sleep. In MKUltra, survival wasn't about bullets or borders. It was about holding on to your own mind as strangers tried to pull it apart. A single drop of LSD could steal your name. A recorded whisper could rewrite your memories. And one wrong experiment? It could turn your thoughts into rooms you'd never escape. If wandering into the darkest corners of history brings you an uneasy kind of calm, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what memory refuses to fade? Now, lower the lights. Our story begins with a door labeled Research Only and a mind about to be unmade. You find yourself drifting into a space where the air feels heavy, thick with unspoken secrets, and the faint, metallic tang of disinfectant mixed with something less identifiable, something chemical and unsettling. This isn't the bustling corridor of the typical hospital, filled with the soft murmurs of visitors or the hurried footsteps of nurses. Instead, you are enveloped by an unnatural quiet, broken only by the persistent, low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Their cool white glow casts long, flat shadows, striping the polished linoleum floor, making every corner feel distant and every sound feel amplified, yet strangely muffled. As you move through this luminous labyrinth, you notice that every door you pass is sealed shut, an unyielding barrier of steel and thick wood, often marked with stark red letters declaring classified or authorized personnel only. These signs aren't merely administrative warnings. They hang in the air like silent threats, whispering of boundaries that once crossed cannot be uncrossed. Each window, if one were even present in this internal maze, would be opaque, offering no glimpse of the outside world, no reassuring hint of daylight or passing clouds. It's as if this entire wing has been hermetically sealed, designed to swallow whispers, to absorb any cries, ensuring that whatever unfolds within these walls remains solely within them. Beyond one of these anonymous doors, if your imagination could pierce through the barrier, you might glimpse a different kind of chamber. Perhaps you'd see glassware bubbling gently with unknown chemicals, releasing faint, sweet, or acrid smells into the contained air. There might be metal restraints, gleaming dully under the same unblinking lights, bolted firmly to tables that seem too sterile, too cold. And then the needles, thin, sharp, catching the light like waiting knives, promising not healing or comfort, but an invasive intrusion. This isn't a place of recovery, you realize with a slow dawning dread. This is not a sanctuary for the unwell. Instead, you are in a workshop, a meticulous and chilling laboratory, purposefully designed for the delicate yet devastating task of dismantling human minds. It all began not with a grand declaration of war, but with a quiet, profound question, whispered in hushed tones behind these very doors. Can the human will be completely broken? Can the very essence of a person, their identity, their autonomy, be fractured into fragments and then reassembled, perhaps even rewritten? The Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, nurtured a belief, a terrifying ambition, that controlling the minds of individuals could become a weapon far stronger, far more insidious, and ultimately more effective than any bomb, any missile. It promised absolute power, a silent dominion over the most intimate of territories, the self. Within these cold, clinical spaces, the concept of healing was an alien one. There were no compassionate diagnoses, no gentle prognoses. The sole directive, the underlying purpose, was an unyielding pursuit of rebuilding the soul from an absolute zero point. Those who eventually found themselves walking through these sealed corridors or being led to those stark metal tables were told, often with reassuring smiles and soft voices, that they were participating in research. They were informed, perhaps, that their contributions were vital to understanding the complexities of the human brain or to developing new methods of psychological care. But the unspoken, chilling truth, the one that hung heavy in the air like the unseen chemicals, was this. None of them knew, not truly, that when their time here concluded, they would leave as someone else entirely. Their names might remain, their faces might be recognizable, but the architecture of their inner world, the very landscape of their self, would be irrevocably altered, perhaps even lost to them forever. As you step back in time, the origins of such a chilling endeavor aren't found in one sudden dramatic genesis, but rather in the gradual coalescing of earlier, quieter shadows. MKUltra, the program that would eventually cast such a long, dark pall over history, was not a beginning, but rather the culmination, the final, terrifying evolution of ideas that had been germinating in clandestine corners for years. It was born from experiments that paved the way, each a tentative step further into the delicate and dangerous terrain of the human psyche. You might hear whispers of Project Bluebird, born in 1949, a gentle-sounding name for something that sought to unravel the very fabric of identity. Imagine the quiet intensity of those early sessions, where researchers, often cloaked in the guise of medical professionals, explored the unsettling potential of hypnosis. They experimented with its ability to create artificial amnesia, to implant false memories, or to destabilize a person's sense of self, making them question everything they believed to be true about who they were. They delved into forced addiction, observing how dependency could be engineered, how craving could become a tool of control, breaking down an individual's resistance and making them pliable. It was a slow, insidious dance, aiming to chip away at the edges of a person's mind, making them more receptive to suggestion, more vulnerable to manipulation. Then just 2 years later, in 1951, Project Artichoke emerged from Bluebird's quiet shadows, asking an even more terrifying question, its very premise a chilling thought. Could a human being be programmed, like a machine, to commit an act as extreme as murder? Could an individual be turned into an unwitting instrument of destruction, their own will bypassed, their conscience overridden by carefully crafted commands? Internal memos from this era, now dusty and faded, would ask with a chilling detachment, can selective amnesia be engineered? They sought to understand if specific memories, inconvenient truths, or inconvenient knowledge could be precisely locked away, hidden even from the individual's own consciousness, only to be recalled if and when an outside operator deemed it necessary. These early inquiries were not confined to theoretical discussions. They were put into practice, often in stark, isolated settings. You can almost feel the cold dread of those who became subjects, drawn from the fringes of society or compelled by circumstance. Prisoners, already stripped of much of their autonomy, became ideal candidates for these early tests. Soldiers, sworn to obedience, found themselves unwittingly participating in experiments far removed from the battlefield. And, in a particularly unsettling turn, even some CIA personnel, trusting in the mission, were subjected to these early, probing experiments, becoming guinea pigs in their own agency's quest for mind control. Bluebird sought to lock memories, to bury them deep beneath layers of suggestion and induced forgetfulness. Artichoke, on the other hand, was more aggressive, attempting to unlock morality, to strip away the natural barriers of conscience and empathy that prevent a person from committing heinous acts. Neither of these initial projects achieved their ultimate, chilling goals. They faced technical difficulties, unforeseen psychological resistances, and the inherent complexity of the human mind itself proved a formidable opponent. Yet, their failures, rather than leading to abandonment, became something else entirely. They transformed into blueprints, into a foundation for something far more aggressive, far more ambitious, and terrifyingly unconstrained. From their ashes, like a phoenix rising from the dark, MKUltra emerged. It was a darker, more expansive, and utterly relentless experiment, fueled by the insights gained from Bluebird and Artichoke's limitations, and for the CIA, the initial, tentative ethical limits that might have once lingered in the background were now completely abandoned, no longer even part of the hushed conversations behind those thick, anonymous doors. The path forward was clear, unobstructed by moral considerations, leading straight into the heart of the human mind. Now, let your thoughts drift into a different kind of quiet space. Perhaps an office tucked away in a bustling city, yet entirely removed from its daily rhythm. You might picture a worn briefcase, its leather softened by countless journeys, resting beside a desk cluttered with scientific papers and chemical diagrams. And there, amidst the quiet order, you see the figure of a man. His demeanor is outwardly calm, almost unassuming, and you might notice a slight stutter when he speaks, a hesitation that contrasts sharply with the chilling clarity of his intellect. This is Sidney Gottlieb, a name that would become synonymous with the darkest chapters of MKUltra. He moved through his work with an unnerving detachment, treating the very essence of the human mind not as a sacred trust, but as a malleable substance, like a master blacksmith carefully observes molten metal, ready to shape it with precision and heat. Gottlieb held a profound yet terrifying belief that the human mind was essentially soft material. He saw it as something that could be pounded, stretched, and reformed with the application of the correct chemical cocktail, a carefully concocted brew designed to strip away defenses and reshape consciousness. His toolkit was not one of healing balms or soothing remedies, but a potent, aggressive array of compounds. Barbiturates, used to induce profound sedation, would quiet the mind, making it receptive. Amphetamines would then shock it awake, creating a jarring, disorienting push and pull. PCP, with its dissociative properties, would sever the mind from reality, twisting perceptions and blurring the lines of self. And then, the cornerstone of his experiments. Megadoses of LSD, administered in quantities far beyond anything considered therapeutic or even safe, designed to completely shatter the delicate architecture of thought and perception. For Gottlieb and those under his direction, the concept of an ethics board was non-existent. The notion of safety limits was an irrelevant concern, an obstacle to be circumvented rather than a guideline to be followed. There was only one measure of success: results. The effects, the alterations, the breaks in the human psyche, these were his data points, the tangible outcomes of his chemical alchemy. Those who were subjected to these extreme interventions were often misled, told they were receiving treatment, a word that, in this context, became a cruel perversion of its true meaning. But for Gottlieb, these individuals were simply variables in an equation, sources of information, their suffering merely the raw material for his chilling experiments. They were subjects, not patients. Their profound distress was data. To facilitate his clandestine work, Gottlieb meticulously constructed a nationwide web of hidden safe houses, each one a stage for his dark theatricals. You might envision the dim, smoky interiors of brothels, seemingly innocuous places where encounters were fleeting and discretion was paramount. Or perhaps the vibrant, chaotic lofts of counterculture communities, where unconventional lifestyles could provide cover for even more unconventional research. Then there were the sterile, isolated basements of hospitals, where the veneer of medical legitimacy offered the perfect disguise for unethical procedures. His influence was vast, stretching from the bustling streets of New York City, where hidden rooms held their secrets, all the way north to Montreal, Canada, where other unsuspecting facilities became unwilling participants in his grand design. Under the cold, calculating guidance of Sidney Gottlieb, MKUltra ceased to be merely a project and transformed into a veritable factory for controlled madness. It was a systematic, industrialized approach to breaking and reshaping human minds, all under the cloak of national security. Within the hushed circles of intelligence, where euphemisms and codenames were common currency, Gottlieb acquired a new, chilling moniker. He was known, with a mixture of awe and perhaps a touch of fear, as the Black Sorcerer. A fitting title for a man who wielded chemicals like spells, seeking to unlock the deepest, most guarded secrets of the human soul, not for enlightenment, but for control. Now, shift your gaze, letting your mind wander into places that, on the surface, seem to embody trust and learning. Institutions designed for healing, education, and rehabilitation. But for the purposes of MKUltra, these were merely facades, silent sanctuaries of subterfuge. You might imagine walking into the quiet, echoing basement of a venerable university campus. There are no students engaged in lively debates, no professors delivering inspiring lectures, no hum of academic life. Instead, the air is still, perhaps carrying a faint institutional scent of old paper and dust, mixed with something else, something cold and metallic. Here you might find those same metal restraints, the bubbling glassware, the gleaming needles, all hidden away, far from the inquisitive eyes of the academic community. Academia, with its inherent respectability and perceived dedication to knowledge, became the perfect disguise for these illegal and deeply unethical experiments. It's a sobering thought to consider that approximately 44 universities, institutions meant to foster open inquiry and ethical advancement, unknowingly funneled students and resources into these clandestine CIA studies. Young, impressionable minds, eager to contribute to scientific understanding, or perhaps seeking a small stipend, found themselves becoming unwitting participants. They might have signed consent forms that vaguely alluded to behavioral research or psychological studies, never realizing the true, darker implications of what they were entering. The allure of contributing to science, the trust placed in academic authority, was systematically exploited, turning centers of learning into quiet conduits for exploitation. But the reach of this human grinding machine extended even further, seeking out the most vulnerable members of society. Psychiatric patients, already struggling with their own mental health challenges, became particularly easy victims. Their existing conditions often provided a convenient cover for the severe psychological disturbances induced by the experiments. Any erratic behavior, any profound memory loss, could be dismissed as a symptom of their underlying illness, rather than a direct consequence of deliberate intervention. In the sterile, often isolating environments of mental hospitals, these individuals were subjected to drug experimentation, sensory deprivation, and various forms of psychological torture. Their cries for help often unheard or disregarded, lost in the institutional silence. And then there were the prisons, places already designed for confinement and control, which became perfect, ready-made laboratories. Inmates, stripped of their freedom and often their rights, were transformed into mere test objects. They endured forced drug administrations, often without explanation or consent, becoming living barometers for the effects of hallucinogens, sedatives, and other psychoactive compounds. Hypnosis was attempted, not as a therapeutic tool, but as a means of control and manipulation. Sensory torture, designed to disorient and break down mental resilience, was also applied. Every facility, whether it was a respected university, a clinical hospital, or a forbidding prison, played a distinct and crucial role in this vast, interconnected machine. A machine meticulously engineered to shred identity. The researchers themselves, those who directly administered the drugs or orchestrated the sensory deprivation, were often kept in the dark about the true nature of their work. They were told they were engaged in behavioral science, contributing to vital studies that would advance the understanding of human behavior, perhaps even for noble purposes like national defense. They were assured of the scientific rigor, the importance of their data. But the subjects, the men and women whose minds were being systematically dismantled, were told nothing. They were guinea pigs, their humanity often disregarded, their suffering justified by vague notions of scientific progress. The devastating consequence for many was a profound and irreversible memory loss. They walked out of these silent sanctuaries, if they were fortunate enough to walk out at all, unable to remember their own names, their pasts erased, their very sense of self fractured beyond recognition. For the architects of MKUltra, these broken individuals, those whose minds had been utterly shattered, were not tragedies. They were the most valuable, the most telling indicators of success. Imagine, if you will, the profound stillness of a hospital bed, where you lie not in restful sleep, but in a state of unsettling suspension. Your eyes may be open, or perhaps your eyelids feel too heavy to lift, but your mind is awake, keenly aware, yet mentally pinned in place, unable to escape the unfolding experience. The room is quiet, sterile, but the silence is an illusion. Through a pair of headphones clamped gently yet firmly over your ears, a single voice begins to speak. And then it repeats. Not a comforting lullaby, not a reassuring phrase, but a single sentence, or perhaps a short, unsettling monologue, played over and over, 100,000 times, perhaps even more. The numbers themselves are staggering, but the experience is beyond measure. This was Dr. Ewan Cameron's invention, a method he chillingly termed psychic driving. It sounds almost innocuous, like a gentle journey of the mind, doesn't it? But it was anything but. This was psychological demolition, a systematic, relentless assault on the very foundations of your personality. The messages delivered through those headphones could range from subtly insidious suggestions designed to undermine your self-worth, to outright insults, repeated until they began to echo the truth in your own mind. Or they could be hypnotic commands, simple directives that, with enough repetition, began to burrow deep into your subconscious, bypassing your conscious resistance. Weeks could pass in this state. You might drift in and out of awareness, the boundaries of time blurring, the outside world fading into an indistinct dream. Yet the tape would continue its incessant loop, an unwavering voice, a constant presence in the otherwise silent void. There were moments of profound, disorienting quiet, but then the voice would return, always the same, always insistent. Cameron believed with a chilling conviction that by continually bombarding the mind with these repeated messages, he could systematically destroy the old personality. He aimed to strip away existing beliefs, memories, and self-concepts, essentially clearing the slate. His ambition was to erase the past, to remove what he considered the defective or undesirable aspects of an individual's mind. But what he failed to do, what he never even truly attempted, was to build a new one. Instead, after weeks, sometimes months of this relentless assault, he left behind only ruins. The delicate architecture of the self was shattered, a landscape of debris where a cohesive personality once stood. Survivors of this horrific process would later describe their minds with a profound sense of alienation, as if their inner world was filled with someone else's voice. It was a violation not just of their bodies, but of their very identity, a persistent echo of a foreign presence within their own thoughts. The human psyche, in Cameron's chilling vision, became nothing more than a cassette tape, a recording that could be erased, overwritten, and then played back with someone else's narration, a constant, looping reminder of what had been lost. Now, let your imagination lead you into a different chamber, one where the air itself feels charged, buzzing with an almost invisible energy. You might detect the sharp, acrid scent of burnt ozone mingling with the metallic tang of machinery. Here, the quiet is punctuated by the rhythmic hum and occasional sharp crackle of electrical currents, an ominous symphony of power. In this room, the methods became even more brutal, a direct assault on the very fabric of the brain. Patients were subjected to electroshock therapy, but not in the controlled, carefully measured way sometimes used for therapeutic purposes. Here, the intensity was escalated, delivering between 30 to 40 times the normal voltage, an electrical storm unleashed directly upon the delicate neural pathways. Imagine the sheer force of such a jolt, a lightning strike through the brain. And then, layer upon that an even more insidious element. Megadoses of LSD administered concurrently. This combination was designed not merely to disorient, but to completely fracture identity, to shatter the very core of who a person understood themselves to be. Dr. Cameron, still at the helm of these devastating experiments, referred to this process with a chillingly detached term: a reset. He believed he was clearing the board, wiping away the patterns of an undesirable personality, preparing the mind for a complete overhaul. But for the survivors, those who endured this profound violation, the experience was far from a simple reset. They described it in stark, visceral terms, as if being killed without dying. It was an annihilation of the self, a dissolution of their inner world, leaving them adrift in a terrifying void. The consequences were devastating and often irreversible. Many lost their most fundamental memories, the vivid recollections of childhood, the faces of loved ones, even the very language they had spoken since infancy. You can almost feel the chilling emptiness of waking up to a world where words no longer hold meaning, where familiar faces are just strangers, and your own past is a blank, terrifying expanse. Some individuals, after enduring this deep depatterning, regressed to an infant-like state, their minds wiped clean, forcing them to relearn the most basic functions. Imagine the slow, arduous process of relearning how to walk, how to speak, how to feed oneself, as if being reborn into a world that is utterly foreign, with no memory of ever having lived in it before. To further ensure compliance and prevent any resistance during these torturous procedures, a paralytic drug called curare was often administered. This potent substance rendered the patients completely immobile, unable to twitch a muscle, unable to cry out. Yet they remained fully awake, conscious witnesses to the dismantling of their own minds. Trapped within their paralyzed bodies, they experienced the full horror of the electroshock and the hallucinogenic torment, conscious but powerless. Medicine, intended to heal and alleviate suffering, was twisted into an instrument of torture, disguised under the thin veneer of research. For the cold, calculating minds behind MKUltra, these profound, irreversible damages, these shattered lives, were not failures. They were unequivocally hailed as success. Now, shift the scene entirely, away from the sterile chill of hospitals and the hushed confines of universities, and into a space that on the surface hums with a different kind of energy. A dimly lit hotel room. Picture the scene. The rich, smoky scent of whiskey and stale cigarettes hanging heavy in the air. The faint, sweet perfume of lipstick. The soft glow of a bedside lamp casting a warm, deceptive light. It's a room designed for discreet encounters, for secrets exchanged in hushed tones. Yet, behind a cleverly concealed one-way mirror in an adjoining dark observation room, CIA operatives sit in an unsettling calm, sipping beers, their faces illuminated by the glow of small notepads where they meticulously jot down observations. This was the bizarre, disturbing reality of Midnight Climax, one of MKUltra's most audacious and ethically bankrupt sub-projects. Here, the conventional boundaries of human decency were not just bent, but completely shattered. Prostitutes, unknowingly or perhaps unwittingly employed by the agency, were tasked with luring unsuspecting targets, often foreign diplomats, businessmen, or individuals deemed persons of interest, into these hidden hotel rooms. Drinks would be offered, seemingly as a gesture of hospitality, but these beverages were secretly dosed with potent, high concentrations of LSD. As the drug took hold, plunging the unwitting subjects into profound, often terrifying hallucinations, every flicker of their altered state was meticulously observed, recorded, and studied. There was no consent sought, no warning given, no possibility of escape from this surreal, chemically induced nightmare. The operatives behind the glass watched with detached curiosity, dissecting every reaction, every shift in behavior, every expression of fear or disorientation, all in the name of understanding the drug's potential as a truth serum or a tool for manipulation. The depravity extended even further. You can almost feel the chilling disregard for public safety as they tested LSD aerosols, discreetly sprayed in bathroom stalls, observing how the potent hallucinogen dispersed into the air and what effects it had on unsuspecting individuals who merely used the facilities. They even experimented with introducing LSD into public toilets, pushing the boundaries of ethical conduct to see just how far the psychoactive substance could spread, how many unwitting citizens could be affected, and how their behavior might be subtly altered. This was not science in any recognizable ethical form. It was a voyeuristic madness, funded by taxpayer dollars, the chilling spectacle of human vulnerability exploited for clandestine purposes. The safe houses and brothels, intended as places of fleeting indulgence, were transformed into playgrounds for unethical experimentation, where lives were toyed with, minds were invaded, and the very concept of individual autonomy was utterly disregarded. In their internal memos, the CIA, with a characteristic chilling euphemism, labeled these dark escapades as mere field testing, a sterile, detached term to describe a series of actions that were, in truth, an affront to human dignity and a grotesque perversion of scientific inquiry. Now, let your thoughts settle upon an even more disturbing concept, one that delves into the very architecture of consciousness. The chilling ambition to create two distinct personalities within a single human body, each unaware of the other's existence, yet both serving a hidden purpose. This is the blueprint for what would come to be known as the Manchurian Candidate, a concept born from the intersection of hypnosis, trauma, and a profoundly unethical drive for absolute control. The groundwork for this terrifying idea was pioneered by figures like George Estabrooks, who explored the outer limits of hypnotic suggestion. Imagine the meticulous, dark art of crafting such a duality. You start with what appears to be a normal individual, perhaps a soldier, a seemingly ordinary person living an ordinary life. This is personality A, the conscious, visible self, equipped with all the memories, beliefs, and behaviors that define them in the everyday world. They are a functional, integrated person, entirely unaware of the hidden depths within their own mind. But then, through a series of carefully orchestrated traumas, combined with deep hypnotic suggestion, a second personality is cultivated. This is personality B, a hidden operative, lying dormant within the subconscious, waiting for its moment. This alternate self is typically programmed to be cold, ruthless, and devoid of the moral inhibitions that might restrain personality A. Crucially, personality A knows absolutely nothing of B. It has no memory of the hypnotic inductions, no recollection of the programming, no awareness of the dark presence lurking beneath the surface of its own mind. Yet, personality B, the hidden one, knows everything. It possesses all the memories of personality A, all the information absorbed by the conscious self, making it a perfectly informed, yet utterly detached, instrument. The activation of personality B would be triggered by a specific secret phrase, a seemingly innocuous word or sequence of words that, when spoken, would unlock the hidden operative, allowing it to take control. Once activated, personality B could carry out specific instructions, covertly deliver messages, sabotage operations, or even commit acts of violence, including murder, without the conscious self ever being aware of it. The chilling genius of this method from a military or intelligence perspective was its absolute deniability. If captured, personality A could not reveal secrets simply because it didn't know them. The conscious mind would genuinely have no recollection of any illicit activities, offering a perfect alibi, a truly unwitting agent. This concept laid the horrifying blueprint for the creation of hypnotic assassins, individuals who could be weaponized without their conscious knowledge or consent. Figures like Jolly West, another prominent name in these dark circles, are believed to have further refined these techniques, applying them to both military personnel and, unsettlingly, to civilian subjects. The idea that someone could be engineered to commit an act so profound, so devastating, and then return to their normal life with no conscious memory of it, is a thought that lingers. The suggestion that someone like Sirhan, the assassin of Robert F. Kennedy, may have been one such product remains a persistent, unsettling theory. A testament to the chilling possibilities that such experiments opened up, forever blurring the lines between individual will and external control. Now, visualize a scene shrouded in the deliberate haze of destruction, a desperate attempt to erase the past. It's 1973, and the directive comes from the very top. CIA Director Richard Helms orders the immediate destruction of all MKUltra files. Imagine the crackle and roar of incinerators, devouring decades of meticulously compiled records, research notes, financial ledgers, and, perhaps, even the personal accounts of the countless individuals whose lives were irrevocably altered. Dozens of years of illicit experiments, the chilling documentation of shattered minds and ethical transgressions, went up in smoke, dissolving into ash and memory. The intention was clear: to bury the truth so deeply that it could never be unearthed, to ensure that the horrifying scope of MKUltra would forever remain hidden in the shadows. It was a vast, systematic purge, designed to leave no trace. Yet sometimes, even the most meticulous cover-ups fail. Not through heroic intervention, but through simple, bureaucratic error. Miraculously, around 20,000 financial documents, the prosaic paperwork of budgets and expenditures, survived this inferno. Perhaps they were misfiled, tucked away in an obscure corner of an archive, deemed less significant than the more explicit experimental notes. These scraps of paper, seemingly mundane accounting records, became an unexpected lifeline. They formed the fragile yet undeniable foundation for all later investigations, providing the first concrete evidence that something profoundly wrong had indeed taken place. The first whispers of the truth began to emerge from the darkness. It was Seymour Hersh, a tenacious investigative journalist who in 1974 publicly exposed the scandal, ripping away the veil of secrecy and dragging the horrifying story of MKUltra into the unforgiving light of public scrutiny. The revelations sent shockwaves through the nation, sparking outrage and demanding accountability. In response, two significant investigations were launched: the Rockefeller Commission and the Church Committee. These official bodies were tasked with delving into the depths of the CIA's domestic activities, and through their tireless efforts, they painstakingly pieced together fragments of the truth, often from those very same misfiled financial documents. They dragged what they could into the daylight, revealing a picture of widespread abuse and ethical abandonment. Yet, even under intense public pressure, the CIA admitted only a sliver of what had truly happened. They acknowledged some of the more egregious abuses, but the full, horrifying scope remained obscured. Thousands upon thousands of victims, those who had endured the systematic destruction of their minds, had no records to prove what had been done to them. Their names were not in the surviving financial ledgers. Their suffering was not quantifiable in budget reports. Many had been subjected to the intentional erasure of their memories, a side effect that was, in fact, a deliberate objective. How could they testify to experiences they could no longer recall? How could they seek justice when the very evidence of their trauma had been burned away, along with their pasts? MKUltra did not die because of a sudden surge of conscience within the agency. It died, quite simply, because it was discovered, its existence exposed not by internal moral reckoning, but by external, accidental revelation. The shadows of those burned files, however, still linger, a constant reminder of buried truths and lives irrevocably lost. And so, we arrive at the final, lingering question, one that settles over you with a subtle, unsettling weight. Did MKUltra truly end? Officially, the program was terminated in 1964, a date offered as a definitive closure. But the shadows, once cast, are not so easily dispelled. Unofficially, the objectives, the underlying drive for behavioral control, simply shifted and adapted. Projects like MK Search and other clandestine branches are believed to have continued for at least another decade, perhaps even longer, evolving and mutating, changing names as readily as a chameleon changes color. The core goal, the insidious ambition of controlling human behavior, manipulating the very processes of thought and decision-making, never truly disappeared. It simply went deeper underground, adapting to the changing technological landscape. As the years advanced, the crude, often brutal methods of the earlier era began to seem archaic. The need for isolated basements, the messy application of chemicals, the overt use of electroshock. These gave way to cleaner, quieter, and far more subtle approaches. Technology became the new frontier for mind manipulation. Behavioral science, once a shadowy academic pursuit, merged seamlessly with the burgeoning fields of surveillance, the pervasive reach of algorithms, and the sophisticated art of persuasion. The battleground for psychological warfare slowly, almost imperceptibly shifted. It moved from the hidden, humming basements of hospitals and universities to the gleaming boardrooms of tech companies, and ultimately onto the omnipresent screens that now dominate our daily lives. Many experts, those who have spent years sifting through the remaining fragments of evidence and haunting testimonies, believe that MKUltra didn't truly cease to exist. Instead, they suggest it simply rebranded, like a corporation shedding a tarnished image, evolving into new, more sophisticated and less traceable programs. The enduring suspicion is fueled by the persistent gaps in the historical record, the vast numbers of files that remain missing, the witnesses who have died under mysterious circumstances, and the testimonies that have been censored or dismissed. These silences speak louder than any official declaration of closure, leaving an unsettling void in our understanding. Even now in our contemporary world, the global competition for influence over human thought and behavior continues, perhaps more intensely than ever before. Nations, corporations, and various entities still vie for dominion over the most potent weapon imaginable, the human mind itself. The methods have changed, the names have certainly changed, and the techniques have become far more insidious, cloaked in the guise of marketing, social media algorithms, or advanced psychological operations. But the fundamental quest remains the same: to understand, to predict, and ultimately, to control the thoughts and actions of individuals. So, as you drift back to the quiet of your own space, perhaps listen a little more closely to the whispers in the digital ether, and remember that in every era, the strongest and most vulnerable weapon is the human mind itself. And perhaps the story of its unmaking is far from over.
Welcome, my fellow nocturnal historians, as the world outside settles into its quiet slumber and the gentle hum of the night begins its lullaby. I invite you to join me on a voyage back in time. We'll journey into one of the most shadowy and deeply unsettling chapters of modern history, a tale woven with ambition, fear, and the deepest mysteries of the human mind. While many narratives sensationalize the era of covert operations, tonight, we seek a deeper understanding, a quiet contemplation of its intricate, often unsettling, truths, delivered with the calm reflection only the stillness of night can offer. Before we fully immerse ourselves in this journey through clandestine science, I gently invite you to share where in this wide, sleeping world you're tuning in from, and what hour the night has brought to your corner. It's always a privilege to connect with this global community of quiet seekers, united in our curiosity for the hidden currents of history. If these whispered histories bring you peace or thoughtful reflection, a gentle like and a subscription would be deeply appreciated, ensuring you don't miss our future explorations into the past. Now, let your shoulders relax. Dim your lights just a touch more. Perhaps adjust your pillow and find that perfect, comfortable spot. Allow the soft current of this story to carry you, not with alarm, but with a quiet, scholarly fascination. As we ease into tonight's narrative, let us turn the page, together, on a chapter that still whispers through the quiet halls of memory. The hour is late, and a profound quiet has settled over the sprawling, low-slung buildings of CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. Outside, the autumn air would carry the crisp scent of fallen leaves and distant pine. But within these hushed, utilitarian corridors, only the faint hum of unseen machinery whispers through the night. It is a world cloaked in purpose, often unseen, always vigilant. And it is into this world, under the deepening cloak of darkness, that our story gently begins. A man, his gait marked by a slight limp, his presence almost spectral in its quietude, approaches the guard's desk. He is soft-spoken, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbs the stillness. With a deliberate movement, he signs the logbook, etching a new identity into the official record. Sherman R. Grifford. This name, a temporary shield in a career built on secrecy, is but one of many he will employ. In the years to come, this unassuming chemist would be known by far more chilling monikers within the agency's hushed circles. The Black Sorcerer, and, perhaps most ominously, Poisoner-in-Chief. This man is Sidney Gottlieb. He is far from the dashing, audacious figures often depicted in cinematic tales of espionage. There is no bravado in his bearing, no flashy displays of wit or daring. Instead, he embodies a profound sense of modesty, a reclusive nature that drew him to the solitude of a cabin, to the quiet, rhythmic tasks of goat farming, far removed from the complex, often disturbing, machinations of state. He was deeply unconventional, a man of quiet habits who would embark on a path that would shake the very foundations of ethical science and human dignity. At the heart of the CIA during this tense post-war era, one terrifying question pulsed like a fevered drumbeat, echoing through the minds of its most senior strategists. Could the human mind, that most intricate and sacred of personal domains, truly be controlled? Much like a finely tuned machine. The very notion was unsettling, yet it held an almost irresistible allure. This question was not merely academic. It was born of profound anxieties. Reports, often fragmentary and terrifying in their implications, whispered of Soviet and Chinese brainwashing breakthroughs. Tales of prisoners of war returning with altered loyalties, of public confessions delivered with chilling, robotic precision, ignited a furious, desperate fear within America's intelligence community. This wasn't merely a political struggle. It was perceived as a dark, scientific arms race, one fought on the battleground of the human psyche itself. Sidney Gottlieb, with his quiet intensity and his deep background in chemistry and toxicology, became the man tasked with answering this dreadful question. He was the one chosen to explore the forbidden frontiers of consciousness, to bend minds, to erase or reshape memories, and to fragment personalities in ways never before attempted. It was a mission that would lead him into the deepest, darkest corners of human experience, blurring the lines between science and sorcery, between protection and profound transgression. It is crucial to remember, as we journey through this narrative, that this is not the stuff of elaborate fiction. Much of what we will recount, while almost unbelievable in its scope and audacity, would later be laid bare, albeit imperfectly, during U.S. or Senate hearings. The whispers would become public record, though the full story, perhaps, will forever remain elusive, guarded by shadows and lost documents. As the chapter of this night at Langley quietly closes, we are left with a lingering image, a single, dim desk lamp casting a pale glow across a heavy manila folder. On its surface, stamped in bold, stark letters, is the designation MKUltra, and just beneath it, a chilling, almost casual notation, a pending order to destroy everything. A stark testament to the clandestine nature of the work about to unfold, and a quiet foreshadowing of the efforts that would be made to erase its very existence. The night deepened around Langley, holding its secrets close, while a new, unsettling era quietly, almost imperceptibly, began to dawn. Our quiet journey now takes us further back in time, away from the hushed corridors of Langley, to the bustling, vibrant streets of the Bronx in the early decades of the 20th century. Here, amidst the rich tapestry of immigrant life, Sidney Gottlieb was born into an Orthodox Jewish family. From his earliest days, he carried what many might perceive as imperfections, a club foot that gave him his distinctive limp, and a stutter that made his early communication a challenge. These physical and verbal hurdles, rather than defining him in a limiting way, seemed instead to ignite within young Sidney a lifelong, almost obsessive, drive towards self-improvement, a deep-seated desire to fix himself. He pursued speech therapy with dedication, seeking to smooth the edges of his words. He immersed himself in folk dancing, finding rhythm and fluidity where his feet had once felt clumsy. It was a continuous, quiet process of physical self-reinvention, an internal struggle that perhaps instilled in him a deep understanding of the malleability of the human form and spirit. This early preoccupation with self-mastery, this quiet striving against his own perceived limitations, would, in a strangely unsettling way, foreshadow his later professional trajectory. Academically, Sidney excelled, ultimately graduating with degrees in both agriculture and chemistry. His intellectual curiosity, however, did not stop at the cultivation of crops or the basic principles of chemical reactions. His path drifted steadily, almost imperceptibly, towards the more specialized and potentially dangerous fields of toxicology and biochemical manipulation. he was drawn to the intricate dance of compounds, to their subtle, profound effects on living systems. This intellectual trajectory, from the quiet study of plant life to the potent secrets held within poisons, marked a significant shift in his understanding of power and control. Concurrently with his academic and professional evolution, Gottlieb began a personal distancing from his traditional Jewish identity. It was not an abrupt break, but a gradual, thoughtful exploration. He delved into multiple religions, seeking answers, seeking a framework for understanding the world, before ultimately settling into a quiet atheism. This spiritual journey, a deliberate shedding of inherited traditions, symbolized a broader personal break from convention and a willingness to forge his own path, free from established doctrines. His marriage into the family of a Presbyterian minister further reflected this personal decision to embrace a new, distinct cultural and spiritual landscape, one very different from his upbringing. In a curious twist of fate, a strange coincidence connected Sidney Gottlieb to one of the most powerful figures in the intelligence world, Allen Dulles, then director of the CIA. Both men, despite their vastly different backgrounds, shared the same physical challenges, a leg deformity and speech issues. This shared experience, these silent struggles, created an odd, unspoken kinship between them, a bond perhaps understood only in the quiet recesses of their own experiences. It suggested a mutual understanding of striving, of overcoming, which may have subtly influenced Dulles's trust and reliance on Gottlieb. And so, when Sidney Gottlieb stepped through the guarded gates into the labyrinthine world of Langley, he made a profound, silent exchange. He set aside, or perhaps redefined, the personal morality that might guide an individual in favor of a higher, more abstract ideal, national security. In the crucible of the Cold War, with the perceived existential threat of communism looming large, the boundaries of ethical conduct became blurred, stretched, and, for some, ultimately dissolved. As this chapter draws to a close, we are left to ponder a most unsettling question that echoes softly in the stillness. Was Sidney Gottlieb fundamentally shaped by his early insecurities, by that lifelong quest for self-perfection, which then tragically warped into a desire to perfect or control others? Or was he, in a more deliberate and chilling sense, driven toward the darkness of his later work purely by choice, a conscious decision made in the name of a perceived national imperative? The answer, perhaps, remains suspended in the quiet contemplation of his complex, enigmatic journey. As the shadows of Gottlieb's past begin to lengthen, our quiet historical journey now guides us to an even darker, more disturbing origin point for the work he would soon undertake. The end of World War II brought with it not just the cessation of hostilities, but a frantic, often morally compromised, scramble for scientific advantage. In the quiet aftermath of the global conflict, the United States embarked on a covert, morally ambiguous initiative known as Operation Paperclip. Under this veil of secrecy, the nation quietly, strategically, recruited a cadre of former Nazi and Japanese biological warfare scientists. These were individuals whose hands were stained with unimaginable atrocities, yet their specialized knowledge was deemed too valuable to ignore. From the brutal theaters of the Pacific, specifically from Japan, came the most chilling acquisition: the commander of the infamous Unit 731, Shiro Ishii. His name, spoken softly, conjures images of unimaginable horror. Unit 731 had been responsible for decades of gruesome, systematic human experimentation, conducted with a cold, detached cruelty that defied comprehension. In a chilling exchange, Ishii handed over his vast archives of data, meticulously recorded findings from countless vivisections, frostbite experiments, and disease inoculations performed on living human beings. In return for this monstrous trove of information, he was granted total immunity from prosecution, a price deemed acceptable by some in the desperate pursuit of scientific supremacy. Similarly, from the ravaged landscapes of Germany, Kurt Blom, the chief of the Nazi biological warfare program, also managed to escape the justice he so clearly deserved. He, too, was quietly absorbed into various U.S. programs, his expertise in chemical and biological agents now redirected rather than condemned. These were not isolated incidents. They represented a systemic decision to prioritize scientific knowledge, however blood-soaked its origins, over the imperative of justice and morality. All of this ill-gotten, deeply unethical data, these borrowed nightmares, were carefully funneled into a single, centralized location, Fort Detrick, Maryland. What had once been a military training site, now transformed into America's central bioweapons laboratory, a repository for the most sinister research ever conceived. It became a crucible where the most inhumane research of World War II, the horrific legacies of Unit 731 and Nazi scientists, was quietly, almost clinically, repackaged. Under the guise of scientific advancement and supported by U.S. funding, these atrocities were stripped of their moral context and integrated into new research agendas. It was into this profoundly compromised environment that Sidney Gottlieb stepped. He inherited this monstrous archive, this chilling legacy of human suffering, now tasked with the formidable and deeply disturbing challenge of weaponizing it. His new mission was to adapt these insights, born of torture and exploitation, for covert psychological warfare. He was to take the blueprints of cruelty and forge them into tools of control. Within the secluded, guarded confines of Fort Detrick, and later extending beyond, scientists were, in essence, freed from the traditional ethical constraints that typically govern scientific inquiry. The pursuit of knowledge, particularly concerning the manipulation of the human mind and body, became paramount. They chased a singular, overriding goal, the ultimate control of human behavior. The whispers within the walls spoke of unlocking secrets, of forging new paths in the mind's labyrinth, regardless of the cost to human dignity. As this chapter quietly fades, we are left with a stark, unsettling image, heavy, sealed files, marked with the ominous word paperclip, being wheeled on silent carts into the underground vaults of Fort Detrick. Each file represented a life extinguished, a boundary crossed, a secret buried deep beneath the earth, waiting to be unearthed and repurposed for a new era of unseen warfare. The quiet hum of the ventilation system in those underground chambers seemed to sigh with the weight of unspeakable histories. Histories that would now become the twisted foundation for what was to come. From the dark archives of borrowed nightmares, our narrative now shifts to the burgeoning, homegrown experiments of the early Cold War era. Even before Sidney Gottlieb inherited the full, monstrous legacy of World War II's unethical research, the CIA had already begun its own tentative, yet deeply concerning, explorations into the manipulation of the human mind. These were the nascent programs, christened with deceptively innocuous names Bluebird and Artichoke. Their initial, seemingly straightforward goal was to create the perfect truth serum, an infallible tool for interrogation, a chemical key to unlock the most guarded secrets. The methods employed under Bluebird and Artichoke were broad, desperate, and remarkably unconstrained by ethical considerations. Experimenters, driven by a growing sense of urgency, tested nearly everything within their reach that promised to alter consciousness or extract information. They delved into the potent effects of alcohol, pushing subjects to extremes of intoxication. They explored the stimulating, disinhibiting properties of cocaine, observing its impact on revelation. Barbiturates, with their sedating and hypnotic effects, were administered in various doses. They subjected individuals to the jarring disruption of electroshock therapy, a method known for its profound psychological impact. Sleep deprivation, pushing the mind to its breaking point, and sensory isolation, stripping away all external stimuli, were also systematically explored. Each technique a crude hammer attempting to crack the shell of human will. The urgency for these programs was palpable, fueled by a deep-seated fear that permeated the highest levels of the agency. CIA analysts found themselves in a state of growing panic. Reports filtered back from the battlefields of Korea and from behind the Iron Curtain American POWs, once staunchly loyal, were returning from communist captivity exhibiting bewildering behavioral changes, making public statements against their country. A Hungarian priest, captured by Soviet forces, appeared on television delivering a robotic confession, his words devoid of genuine emotion, his demeanor unsettlingly blank. These incidents, chillingly similar, led to a pervasive, terrifying conclusion within the intelligence community: the Soviets were ahead. They had achieved a brainwashing breakthrough, and America was desperately playing catch-up in this invisible psychological war. It was in this climate of profound anxiety and perceived inferiority that Allen Dulles, the formidable director of the CIA, made a pivotal decision. Recognizing Gottlieb's unique blend of scientific expertise and his apparent willingness to transgress ethical boundaries in the name of national security, Dulles elevated him. Gottlieb was given the mandate and the resources to expand these initial crude experiments far beyond mere interrogation. His mission now encompassed the far more ambitious and deeply disturbing goals of memory erasure, the deliberate fracturing of personality, and the systematic programming of human behavior. The very fabric of self was to be explored, and perhaps restitched according to external designs. And so, under Gottlieb's expanded purview, the nascent programs of Bluebird and Artichoke quietly evolved, converging and expanding into an overarching, far more ambitious project. This was the birth of MKUltra, a designation that would forever be etched into the annals of covert history, a chilling testament to the lengths to which a nation would go in the throes of fear. MKUltra became an umbrella, sheltering a vast array of experimental programs, many of which were conducted with a disturbing lack of oversight and ethical consideration. To facilitate these clandestine operations, a network of hidden laboratories was established, woven into the very fabric of American society. Universities, with their intellectual curiosity and research infrastructure, were subtly co-opted. hospitals entrusted with the care of the vulnerable became unwitting sites of experimentation. Prisons, filled with populations already deprived of liberty, offered a ready supply of unwitting subjects, and numerous front companies designed to obscure the true nature of their activities provided a convenient cover for funding and logistics. The very institutions designed to educate, heal, and rehabilitate were quietly, insidiously, repurposed for a darker agenda. As this chapter draws to a close, we can almost hear the soft, decisive sound of Alan Dulles' hand stamping approval on the MKUltra directive. It was a moment, quiet and unheralded within the hushed chambers of power, that nonetheless marked a profound turning point. It was the precise moment when the mind war, a battle for the very essence of human identity, officially and terrifyingly began. The whispers of fear had coalesced into a sanctioned program, ready to delve into the uncharted, dangerous territories of the human psyche. In the relentless pursuit of controlling the human mind, Sidney Gottlieb soon turned his attention to a compound that had only recently emerged from the realm of obscure chemical synthesis, lysergic acid diethylamide, more commonly known as LSD. He discovered its profound effects, its astonishing ability to dramatically alter perception, mood, and thought processes, and became utterly convinced that this potent psychedelic might hold the key, the ultimate unlock to total mind control. The sheer power of the substance, its capacity to dissolve the normal boundaries of consciousness, seemed to align perfectly with the ambitious, unsettling goals of MKUltra. The fear of Soviet acquisition, always lurking just beneath the surface of every CIA endeavor, quickly became a driving force. Convinced that such a powerful tool could not fall into enemy hands, the agency embarked on a secretive, unprecedented mission to acquire almost the entire world's supply of LSD. Through clandestine channels, they purchased massive quantities from Sandoz Laboratories, the Swiss pharmaceutical company that had first synthesized the compound. It was a testament to their desperation and their unwavering belief in LSD's potential, effectively cornering the global market for this mind-altering drug. With the substance in hand, the next critical step was to understand its effects, to map the terrain of its psychological impact. The search for a suitable human laboratory, a population that could be subjected to rigorous, often brutal, experimentation, led them to a deeply vulnerable community, then the inmates of Lexington Federal Prison in Kentucky. This institution, ironically, was primarily a facility for drug rehabilitation, filled with addicts desperate for treatment, yearning for a pathway out of their cycles of dependence. It was here that the ultimate human lab was quietly established. The prisoners were offered a chilling bargain. In exchange for participating in drug research programs, they were promised access to the very substances they craved, morphine or heroin. It was an irresistible offer for men trapped in the throes of addiction, a cruel exploitation of their profound vulnerability. What many of these individuals did not know, could not have known, was the true nature of the research. They were unknowingly given massive, repeated doses of LSD, not once, but often for weeks on end, pushing their minds to the very precipice of sanity and beyond. Under the guise of scientific observation, meticulous data was collected. Researchers dispassionately recorded the ensuing psychological chaos, the vivid, terrifying hallucinations that warped reality. the paralyzing paranoia that twisted trust into suspicion, the profound psychosis that shattered normal thought processes, and the ultimate, tragic collapse of personality structure. It was an act of profound dehumanization, where individuals were reduced to mere data points in a grand, terrifying experiment. Among the unwitting test subjects was one infamous name that would later emerge from the shadows: James "Whitey" Bulger, a notorious Boston gangster. His testimony, years later, was a chilling echo from that time. He described the experience not as scientific research, but as torture, a systematic assault that broke his mind apart. His words offer a stark, unvarnished glimpse into the profound and lasting damage inflicted upon these unsuspecting individuals. As this unsettling chapter softly closes, we are left with a haunting image: the sterile, clinical setting of the prison infirmary. Here, doctors, clad in their white coats, calmly took notes, their pens scratching softly on clipboards. Meanwhile, just beyond their detached observation, unseen but deeply felt, inmates screamed through terrifying bad trips, their minds unraveling in agony, an agony they never agreed to experience. The quiet hum of the prison faded into the profound, echoing silence of violated trust. Our journey now takes a darker, more perverse turn, delving into one of MKUltra's most disturbing chapters, Operation Midnight Climax, far from the sterile confines of a prison. This particular experiment unfolded in the shadowy, illicit underworld of major American cities. The CIA, in its relentless pursuit of mind control and the extraction of secrets, established a series of clandestine safe houses in the vibrant, unsuspecting cities of San Francisco and New York. These were not the typical government facilities. They were disguised, chillingly, as brothels. At the helm of this morally bankrupt operation was a man named George Hunter White, a figure whose background spoke volumes about the nature of the task. He was a heavy-drinking former police officer with a well-documented taste for brutality. A man whose personal proclivities seemed to align disturbingly well with the requirements of this covert endeavor. White, it was understood, was not one to shy away from the dark edges of human behavior. The modus operandi was simple, yet deeply insidious. Sex workers were hired, not for their traditional services, but to lure unsuspecting clients back to these safe houses. Once inside, these clients, seeking pleasure, were secretly dosed with LSD. Their drinks would be spiked, or the powerful psychedelic might be administered through other, more surreptitious means. The stage was set for a terrifying psychological experiment. Behind two-way mirrors, installed with chilling foresight, George Hunter White would watch. He would sip his martinis, a cool observer of the unfolding chaos, while discreetly filming the drug-induced disarray. The purpose of this macabre theater was disturbingly clear: to test whether a potent cocktail of sex, fear, acute intoxication, and powerful psychedelics could strip individuals of their defenses, making them reveal their deepest secrets, or render them vulnerable enough to be manipulated or programmed. Could the combination truly break a mind open, leaving it susceptible to external influence? The methods of delivery for the LSD were varied, each more clandestine than the last. Beyond spiked drinks, researchers experimented with aerosolized LSD, spraying the potent drug into the air, hoping subjects would unknowingly inhale it. They also explored the use of experimental vapors, seeking new ways to bypass conscious ingestion and introduce the chemical into the unwitting bodies of their subjects. Tragically, many who walked into these establishments, seeking a moment of fleeting pleasure or diversion, would walk out unknowingly broken, profoundly paranoid, or psychologically scarred for life. Their innocence was stolen, their minds tampered with, all in the name of a covert experiment they knew nothing about. The casual cruelty of this operation, the sheer disregard for human agency and dignity, stands as one of the darkest stains on the MKUltra legacy. As this unsettling chapter softly concludes, we are left with a quiet, yet profoundly disturbing image, a dusty film reel, tucked away in some forgotten archive. On its brittle label, scrawled in an official hand, are the words, chilling in their understatement, midnight climax, confidential, a silent, grainy record of lives irrevocably altered, of an experiment that ventured far beyond any acceptable ethical boundary, leaving only fragments of fractured minds in its wake. Our narrative now brings us to one of the most tragic and haunting figures caught in the cruel web of MKUltra, Frank Olson. He was not an unwitting prisoner or a seduced club patron, but a dedicated scientist, a bacteriologist working at Fort Detrick. His work involved sensitive biological research, and as his involvement deepened, he became increasingly disturbed by the implications of the bioweapons tests being conducted. Whispers and rumors of the possible, unconfirmed use of these weapons during the Korean War weighed heavily on his conscience, stirring a profound ethical torment within him. Olson was a man grappling with a moral crisis, and his distress was palpable to those around him. In November 1953, he attended a CIA retreat at a secluded cabin in Deep Creek Lake, Maryland, an innocuous setting that would become the site of his undoing. During this retreat, Sidney Gottlieb himself, with a chilling casualness, secretly slipped a dose of LSD into Olson's after-dinner drink. It was an unsanctioned experiment, a cruel act of betrayal against a colleague, purportedly to observe the drug's effects firsthand, perhaps to break him down or test his resilience. The LSD plunged Olson into a terrifying psychological spiral. His existing ethical anxieties exploded into profound fear, overwhelming guilt, and a pervasive paranoia that gripped his mind. Convinced that his involvement in the bioweapons program was morally untenable, he declared his intention to leave the agency, to sever ties with the unsettling work he had been doing. This decision, born of his torment, was met with alarm by his CIA handlers. Olson, a scientist with intimate knowledge of highly classified programs, could not simply walk away. In a desperate attempt to contain the escalating situation, CIA handlers rushed Olson to New York City. There, he was placed under the care of an agency-friendly doctor named Harold Abramson, a physician known for his involvement in covert mind control research. Abramson's role was to monitor Olson, perhaps to guide him through his crisis, or to ensure his silence. But the intervention was too late, or perhaps too little. Days later, in the early morning hours of November 28, 1953, Frank Olson fell from the 13th floor window of his room at the Statler Hotel in New York. The official ruling, delivered swiftly, was suicide. But the circumstances were riddled with unsettling inconsistencies. Years later, investigations would reveal signs of a struggle in his hotel room. casting a long, dark shadow of suspicion over the official narrative. Was it suicide? Or was it something far more sinister, a murder orchestrated to silence a man who knew too much? A man whose conscience had become a liability? The truth of Frank Olson's death remained buried for decades, a secret tightly held within the intelligence community. It wasn't until the 1970s that the outlines of the truth began to emerge. Thanks to persistent journalistic inquiry and congressional investigations, in a moment of unprecedented public reckoning, President Gerald Ford formally apologized to the Olson family decades later, the first and only presidential apology ever issued for a CIA killing. It was a stark acknowledgement of profound wrongdoing, a painful admission that the state had caused the death of one of its own citizens under the most egregious circumstances. As this tragic chapter softly concludes, we are left with a haunting image, a cold breeze, whispering through an open hotel window, causing the curtains to flutter gently over an empty ledge. The city outside, indifferent and unknowing, continued its endless hum, while within that quiet room, the silent question of what truly transpired lingered, forever echoing in the stillness of that autumn night. Our quiet journey now moves forward in time to the early 1970s, an era marked by a growing national disillusionment and an increased willingness to challenge institutions of power. The hidden abuses of the CIA, long protected by layers of secrecy, began to slowly, painstakingly come to light. Persistent journalists, driven by a thirst for truth, alongside increasingly assertive congressional committees, started to peel back the layers of covert operations, exposing the unsettling realities beneath. Facing the prospect of public scrutiny and potential legal repercussions, Sidney Gottlieb and the then CIA director, Richard Helms, made a deliberate and damning decision. In a desperate attempt to obliterate the evidence of their clandestine activities, they ordered the destruction of nearly all MKUltra documents. Files were shredded, records were burned, and a systematic effort was made to erase the paper trail of decades of unethical experimentation. It was a calculated act to prevent a full and honest accounting, to bury the truth beneath an avalanche of official silence. However, despite these drastic measures, some fragments of the truth managed to survive. A tenacious researcher named John Marks, utilizing the newly empowered Freedom of Information Act, began to uncover remaining financial records. Like a meticulous archaeologist piecing together ancient pottery shards, Marks painstakingly reconstructed parts of the MKUltra program, revealing glimpses of its vast scope and shocking disregard for human rights. These financial ledgers, often dry and bureaucratic, nonetheless whispered tales of grants to universities, payments to front companies, and allocations for mysterious research projects that hinted at far darker activities. The pressure mounted, and eventually, Sidney Gottlieb was summoned to testify before Congress. Yet, even in this moment of forced transparency, the layers of secrecy and privilege remained. He did not face his accusers in a public forum under the harsh glare of television lights, instead, citing vague health issues. Gottlieb sat in a private room, shielded from public questioning, his testimony a carefully managed performance. During his private appearance, Gottlieb admitted to the LSD experiments and acknowledged involvement in behavioral research. However, with a practiced calm, he He systematically downplayed their significance, dismissing them as scientific dead ends. He presented them as flawed, inconclusive experiments rather than the deliberate, often damaging, incursions into human autonomy that they truly were. It was a masterful evasion, designed to deflect blame and minimize the profound ethical violations that had occurred. For a brief period, the Justice Department considered prosecution for the abuses committed under MKUltra. The sheer scale of the unethical conduct, the violation of countless lives, seemed to demand a legal reckoning. But in the end, perhaps due to the intricate political implications, the difficulty of proving intent with destroyed records, or the powerful influence of the intelligence community, all charges were quietly dropped. The wheels of justice, for the most part, simply ceased to turn. The true tragedy of this cover-up lies in its enduring impact. Most of the victims, those unwitting subjects whose minds and lives were irrevocably altered, never learned they had been experimented upon. The deliberate destruction of records made it almost impossible to trace individual cases, to offer compensation, or even to acknowledge their suffering. Their stories remained untold, their pain unheard, swallowed by the vast silence of shredded documents and official denial. As this chapter softly concludes, we envision Sidney Gottlieb leaving the Congressional building, perhaps through a back exit, quietly, almost unnoticed. His legacy, shrouded in the secrecy of those shredded documents and protected by the weight of official silence, remained largely hidden, a testament to the enduring power of covert operations to evade true accountability. The quiet hum of Washington D.C. carried on, seemingly oblivious to the profound, unaddressed injustices that lingered beneath its polished surface. As we quietly draw closer to the legacy of MKUltra, our journey now explores the fascinating, yet deeply unsettling, concept that captured both the public imagination and the covert ambitions of the intelligence community. The Manchurian Candidate, this idea of a programmed assassin, an individual whose mind could be so completely fractured and rewritten as to commit acts without conscious memory or will, was not merely a Hollywood fantasy. It was a theoretical possibility that deeply influenced parts of MKUltra's psychological track. The genesis of this idea found fertile ground in the theories of figures like the hypnotist George Estabrooks. He made audacious claims, publicly stating his ability to create dual personality agents, individuals who, under specific triggers, could become obedient killers, then revert to their normal selves, utterly forgetting their missions. While much of Estabrooks' work was likely exaggerated for effect or based on flawed methodology, his pronouncements fueled a potent cocktail of fear and fascination within intelligence circles. The notion of a perfectly deniable asset, a weaponized mind, held an almost irresistible allure for those seeking the ultimate advantage in psychological warfare. Further bolstering these explorations was the work of psychiatrist Louis Jolly West. West was a complex figure, involved in deprogramming American POWs who had been subjected to communist brainwashing. Yet, his own methods included controversial hypnosis experiments, delving into the murky depths of altered states of consciousness and the potential for suggestion and control. His work, however ethically dubious, contributed to the growing belief that the human mind, under the right conditions, could indeed be manipulated in profound and unsettling ways. The assassination of Senator Robert F. Kennedy in 1968 and the subsequent trial of Sirhan further ignited public speculation about programmed assassins. Sirhan's erratic behavior, his claims of memory lapses, and the seeming inexplicability of his actions fueled a collective anxiety. Could he have been a Manchurian candidate? The question, however unsubstantiated, resonated deeply with the fears generated by government secrecy and the known existence of mind control research. It became a powerful symbol of public unease. Within the covert laboratories and whispered reports of MKUltra, experiments certainly suggested that the human mind possessed a terrifying malleability. Evidence hinted that memories could indeed be altered, subtly shifted, or entirely fabricated. Identities could be fractured, creating distinct, compartmentalized personalities within a single individual. And, under the right, or rather, the wrong conditions, behavior could be manipulated, influenced, or even overtly programmed. These were not always grand, Hollywood-style transformations, but insidious, incremental changes that nonetheless spoke to a profound vulnerability within the human psyche. The CIA, in its public statements, consistently insisted that mind control never worked, dismissing it as a failed scientific endeavor. This public denial served to reassure a nervous populace, perhaps to discourage further inquiry. However, within the hushed circles of insiders, subtle hints lingered that any successes achieved in the realm of mind control would be classified indefinitely, deemed too sensitive, too dangerous, to ever be released into the public domain. The very nature of the work demanded its perpetual concealment. And so, the public imagination, fueled by compelling narratives and the pervasive reality of government secrecy, merged into the powerful and enduring Manchurian candidate mythos. It became a chilling archetype, a symbol of the deepest fears surrounding individual autonomy and the terrifying potential for external control. As this chapter quietly concludes, we are left in a state of profound ambiguity. The line between conspiracy theory and covert reality becomes almost impossible to discern. The whisper of what might have been achieved, what secrets might still be held, lingers in the air, a testament to the enduring power of the unknown and the unsettling knowledge that the human mind, in its deepest recesses, might not be as inviolable as we wish to believe. Our long, quiet journey through the shadowed corridors of MKUltra now brings us to its final, reflective chapter. Officially, the program ended in the mid-1970s, amidst public outcry and congressional investigation. But the conclusion of the formal program did not mean the disappearance of its central ideas. The unsettling concept of psychopolitical control, the insidious notion that the human mind could be targeted and influenced, lived on not just in the hushed conversations of intelligence agencies, but deeply embedded in culture and in intelligence theory itself. As overt experimentation ceased, the fears subtly shifted. The concern over direct chemical brainwashing morphed into a more pervasive anxiety about control on a societal scale. Questions began to surface about the power of advertising to shape desires, the influence of propaganda to sway beliefs, and the pervasive impact of mass media to subtly manipulate public opinion. These became, in a sense, the new mind control for a modern age, operating not on individual subjects in a lab, but on entire populations through a constant barrage of information and imagery. It is a chilling irony that modern therapy trends, particularly those involving psychedelics for mental health treatment, echo patterns from MKUltra's past. While today's research is conducted with stringent ethical oversight and informed consent, the very substances being explored, like psilocybin or even derivatives of LSD, were once the tools of covert manipulation. This parallel forces us to confront the dual nature of these compounds and the ever-present responsibility to ensure science serves healing, not control. Many thoughtful observers today argue that the digital landscape has become the new frontier for these historical anxieties. Contemporary information warfare, the subtle shaping of perception through algorithms, and sophisticated psychological operations conducted online are seen by some as the digital descendants of MKUltra. They represent a new form of mind control, scaled up and woven seamlessly into the fabric of our everyday digital lives, capable of influencing thoughts, emotions, and behaviors with unprecedented precision and reach. And what of Sidney Gottlieb, the man once dubbed the Black Sorcerer, after orchestrating decades of profoundly disturbing experiments? He retired to a minimalist commune in rural Virginia. There, far removed from the sterile labs and hushed offices of the CIA, he lived a life of seeming tranquility, milking goats and practicing meditation. It is a stark, almost unbelievable contrast, the architect of such horrors seeking solace in the rhythms of nature and quiet contemplation. This final act, however, does little to diminish the profound weight of the suffering he helped engineer. MKUltra remains a powerful, sobering reminder of how easily ethics can collapse, how quickly moral boundaries can dissolve under the immense weight of national fear and the perceived urgency of security. It stands as a testament to the dangerous allure of absolute control and the fragility of human dignity when confronted with unchecked power. Ultimately, MKUltra's very existence proves a terrifying truth. The human mind, that intricate and sacred frontier of self, can indeed be targeted, shaped, broken, and, in some unsettling instances, rewritten. And the uncomfortable lesson, whispered across the decades, is this: governments, in their perpetual quest for advantage and security, will always explore that boundary. The quiet pursuit of influence, of control, will likely never truly end. And so, as the final echoes of this tale fade into the gentle hum of the night, a soft whisper remains. A quiet caution, not just for the past, but for the present and for all the silent futures yet to unfold. Guard your mind, for it is the last frontier truly, irrevocably yours. May your own thoughts find peace and undisturbed sanctuary as the night deepens around you.